our time is short, so you make your questions short, please. President Ford.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I have no further prepared remarks. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. President, you mentioned out there in your speech, not necessarily cutting defense spending, but spreading it out. How would that help cut the deficit?
Well, if you stretch out the defense program from 5 to 6 years, in effect stretching out $1.7 trillion over 72 months rather than 60 months, you can have significant cash flow benefits every year, and that will have a corresponding cash flow benefit as far as the deficits are concerned. I would say that it would save in cash flow at least $15 to $25 billion, depending on just how you implemented it. But it would be a significant contribution to debt reduction.
How important is debt reduction?
Well, I happen to believe that reduction of our deficits is the only way we can guarantee that we'll have continued prosperity for the next 5 years. If we all pull together and do our share, we can absolutely maintain a healthy economy for the next 5 years.
Are you told to the President machine?
Yes.
Mr. President, today the MX missile received final congressional approval, and tomorrow Dr. Helen Caldicott, the founder of Women's Action for Nuclear Disarmament, will speak on the same campus. What would you say to her about today's passage?
Well, I haven't heard her remarks, so I am not qualified to answer what she'll say categorically. I can say this. As one who actually negotiated with Mr. Brezhnev to reduce nuclear weapons and who was able to achieve a reduction in strategic weapons in such negotiations, my track record is pretty good in getting results, not talking about it. I would say that in order to have the United States achieve a reduction of nuclear weapons in negotiations, they ought to go to the bargaining table with all of our weapon system available for negotiation, including the MX. I strongly feel the MX vote was the right one. Substantively, in order to maintain equivalence with the Soviet Union, and psychologically and from a negotiating position, absolutely essential.
Mr.
Yes.
President, you mentioned social programs that have been on the books for quite some time and mentioned their essentiality. Could you elaborate a little longer on what programs might be deferred?
Well, I gave 2 examples in response to a question, and there are others that I'm sure the Congress will take a look at. But the 2 I gave are very important. They involve probably anywhere from $6 to $10 billion annually. Yes.
General revenue sharing is one of the programs
Yes,
you mentioned.
absolutely.
Cities and counties have become quite dependent on general revenue sharing to meet operating expenses, especially in the state where we have a frozen tax levy. What options do they have to make up for that revenue that they would lose?
Well, the amount of actual cash that a community or a governmental unit gets out of revenue sharing is really not a significant part of their overall budget. And in the current fiscal crisis that the federal government has, which I happen to think is worse than any individual city or any individual state, first things have to come first. We have to get Uncle Sam's fiscal picture in order if we're going to have a strong nation. And in the process, everybody who's involved in getting money from the federal government will have to share some of the belt-tightening.
Mr. President,
Yes.
along the same lines, the farmers right now are upset about the financial crisis they're going to have. 1986 being an election year, and I believe 23 Republican senators are up for re-election. What effect is the farm vote going to have, the cuts in the farm budget going to have on that vote next year in control of the Senate?
Well, I have great sympathy for the American farmers who bought too much land at too high a price when prices paid for their commodities were high. And I feel very saddened by their economic plight today when land prices are down, when market prices are down, and they overextended themselves. The program of the federal government today is to try and ease this financial crisis by extending the term of their loans, by giving them reduced interest rates, and refinancing their loans that they made when things were going good. Now, I don't believe we can continue farm price support programs that price our commodities out of the world market. Right today, because of our price support programs, Argentina, Australia, other countries are undercutting us in the foreign markets, and our sales abroad as a result are suffering. We've got to be competitive. We're the most efficient agricultural country in the world. And for us, by artificial price supports, cutting ourselves out of those markets doesn't make sense.
Mr. President.
Yes.
You complained about the length and the cost of the presidential campaign. Any thoughts from you on the way in which network television and the major newspapers and wire services have covered the substantive issues of the campaign, especially in the Reagan context?
Oh, I think as a whole, the news media, both the written and the electronic press, did a better than average job. On the other hand, I think they picked up a lot of trivia, which really wasn't very substantive as to the views of either Mondale or Reagan. I wish the networks particularly, but local stations I guess, would spend more time on substance rather than a 15 or 30-second trivia answer to some question. I know how valuable your time is on the tube and all this and that, but you would do a great service to the American people if you would take more time and give more substance instead of just some trivia that you pick up from here or there. Yes, yes.
What are your feelings about the drug and alcohol abuse in this country?
What do I think about drug and alcohol abuse? Well, I think we've got to maximize our effort to do something about it. My wife is the chairman of the board of the Betty Ford Center on Alcoholism and Chemical Dependency, so I know something about how the best way to treat those problems. But we don't have enough good treatment centers around the country to help people who unfortunately have had that difficulty. On the other hand, we ought to do more of education among young people to point out the evils of either alcoholism or drug addiction. So if you try to help those who unfortunately are affected, and you try to educate those who have not yet been affected, I think that's the proper way.
Mr. President, you highlighted some of the changes you'd like to see in the presidential nominating process. Do you think those will become reality?
Well, I think there's a movement afoot. As a matter of fact, in my Ford library at the University of Michigan, we're having a 2.5-day conference on how to improve the election or nomination process. And there's another group under former Congressman Mel Laird and former Democratic National Chairman Bob Strauss at Georgetown University, which is going to do much the same thing. Maybe we can get some momentum going. Maybe we can get some momentum going to bring about necessary legislation. Yes?
Did you say that 40 million drop in the deficit would reduce the interest rates 1.5%?
1.5% across the board. Yes, sir.
Well, in light of what you were saying about the need to reduce the deficit, why do you still think that MX missiles, which some people say will be obsolete when the target gets installed, how can you defend putting MX missiles in against the need to reduce?
Well, for two very good reasons. The first reason being that substantively we need it. As a matter of fact, I initiated in my administration the research and development of the MX missile. Mr. Carter continued it, and under the Scowcroft Commission, we now have the present deployment procedure. We initiated the MX because the Soviet Union, beginning in the late 70s, undertook a massive program to increase the throw weight and to improve the accuracy of their land-based ballistic missiles. And they now have achieved that capability with a new generation of missiles. And for us to retain equivalence, not superiority, equivalence, we need the MX. And secondly, having negotiated with Mr. Brezhnev, the Congress, when I negotiated with him, didn't take any weapon systems away from me. So when I went over to negotiate, we had the opportunity to negotiate any and all weapons that we had available. And the net result was, because I had no hampering by the Congress, we were able to get Mr. Brezhnev to reduce his launchers by about 350. And we only had to reduce ours by about 100. So by having flexibility as a negotiator, I was able to get significant progress. If you take away the MX, Mr. Kampelman and Mr. Glittman and Senator Tower are going to be handicapped in trying to get some responsible reduction.
Mr. President,
Yes.
do you think that our government should interfere with Nicaragua?
Well, I think we have an obligation to help the legitimate Nicaraguans, anti-Sandinistas, who want to restore democracy in their country. The current government in Nicaragua is not a democratic government. It's in effect a dictatorship. And there are bona fide Nicaraguans, anti-Sandinistas, who want to restore a democratic society in Nicaragua. I don't see any harm in Americans or our government helping those legitimately. I wouldn't do it covertly, because that's always criticized, but I would permit it to be done overtly. One more and then we have to go. Somebody back there, yeah.
In your autobiography, you refer to Jimmy Carter as having an obsession with civil rights. Do you think this is detrimental to our foreign affairs after he left office in any way?
Well, I think you have to have a reasonable point of view. I'm very proud of my administration's record on civil rights, and I'm proud of the voting record I had in the Congress on civil rights. But I think you've got to have a reasonable balance. And in some respects, I think the Carter administration went overboard. One more.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
why do you think the Star Wars defense system will help or hinder U.S. Russian soldiers?
Well, I personally believe we ought to maximize our research and development, primarily research on Star Wars. We're a long, long ways away from developing any hardware. This is extremely far-reaching scientific research. We're at least 3 or 4 years away from developing any significant hardware. Let's get the research done and then make a decision as to whether we want to proceed with the actual manufacture of and deployment of hardware. Thank you all. It's nice to see you. It's great to be here at Ball State. Thank you.